Hello everyone, myself Dr. S. Mohamed Nazeer. This class I'm going to teach you macroeconomics. In macroeconomics, classical theory of output and employment and a Keynesian theory of output and employment, or full employment equilibrium and underemployment equilibrium. Let's see one by one. The classical theory. The classical theory was propounded by Karl Marx, Malthus, Adam Smith, Ricardo, Marshall, and others. It runs from 1776 to 1890s. Karl Marx coined the term classical. Let's see the theory. The classical economist asserted that full employment is a normal feature of a capitalistic economy. Full employment is a normal feature of a capitalistic economy. Full employment is defined as an absence of involuntary unemployment. Absence of involuntary unemployment is called a full employment. There is a built-in arrangement in the economy that makes the economy function at full employment level. If there is unemployment, then it is a temporary phenomenon. It is called frictional unemployment. As economy will automatically restore its full employment position. So if there is a unemployment in an economy, that is a temporary phenomenon. Automatically it will restore to the full employment. So the full employment is nothing but absence of involuntary unemployment. Let's see the assumptions of classical theory of output and employment. The first assumption says law of market. The law formulated by J.B. Say states that supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand. That is to say, there is never a deficiency of aggregate demand. There is a never deficiency of aggregate demand. In other words, whatever is produced is demanded. Whatever is produced is demanded. There is neither overproduction nor underproduction. Okay. Say's law implies that an increase in output will generate an equal increase in income and spending. It means that income and product will always be at full employment level. So income and product will always be at full employment level. At this point, if unemployment exists, it will be voluntary. Okay, this is the first assumptions of classical theory of output and employment. Let's see the second assumption of classical theory of output and employment. Flexibility of wage rates and existing prices. Wage price flexibility means that the real wage and prices can change freely and quickly. Wage price flexibility means the real wage and prices can change freely and quickly. These assumptions ensures full employment. For example, if there is unemployment in an economy, then wage rate will fall. This will raise the demand for labor. When the wage rate is falls, this will leads to increased demand for labor by producers till all labor is absorbed and full employment is achieved. These assumptions ensures that supply of laborers equals to demand for labor. When the wage rate is false, the demand for labor will increase, the producer will employ more laborers. So the supply of labor equals the demand for labor. Every worker looking for a jobs gets employed at the prevailing wage rate. Okay. Then similarly, the price flexibility ensures that in every market, aggregate supply equals to aggregate demand. This wage price flexibility leads the full employment level in an economy. Okay. Now the full employment equilibrium. Let's see this with the help of the diagram. The classical theory shows equilibrium level of output at the full employment level. It is shown in the diagram. So AS It is the aggregate supply curve. It shows total supply of goods and services in an economy is perfectly inelastic. This aggregate supply curve perfectly inelastic given by a vertical line at the full employment level of output. This is the full employment level of output OX. It is due to J.B. Say's law of market and wage price flexibility. It means that changes in price level will not affect the aggregate supply. Okay. Now look at this diagram. AD is the aggregate demand curve. AD is the aggregate demand curve. It shows total demand for goods and services in an economy. It is downward sloping. It is downward sloping, showing an inverse relationship between price level and the output demanded. See, at point E, it is the equilibrium point where aggregate demand is equals to aggregate supply. So this is aggregate supply curve, this is aggregate demand curve. Both are equal at point E. It is a full employment equilibrium. It is the full employment equilibrium. It gives OP. It gives OP is the price level as the equilibrium price and OX as the equilibrium level of output. Now I am going to explain the criticism of this theory. J.B. Say's law of market does not exist since supply does not create its own demand. Okay, this J.B. Say's law of market that does not exist since supply does not create its own demand. Keynes maintained that economy may be in equilibrium at less than full employment level. Okay, not necessarily be a full employment equilibrium. It may be or always be a underemployment equilibrium. Okay, this is the second criticism. The third criticism: saving and investment do not depend just on interest rate. The classical economists believed that saving and investment depends upon the interest rate. Actually, the saving depends on a level of disposable income, and investment by a producer depends upon expected rate of return. That is the marginal efficiency of capital. So investment is based on marginal efficiency of capital. The saving is based on disposable income, not only the rate of interest. This is the third criticism. The fourth criticism: flexible wage rate and prices, wage rate flexibility, are rarely observed in the real world condition. In reality, the presence of trade unions, okay, the minimum wage laws, okay, price supports programs ensures fixed wage and prices. There is no flexibility in the real world. Okay, we cannot change the wage, we cannot change the price because of these reasons. The last criticism: the classical theory for ignoring the role of the government. The government can take proper monetary and fiscal measures to increase the level of employment. These are the criticism of the classical theory of output and employment. Now I am going to explain the Keynesian theory of output and employment. During the Great Depression of 1929-33, the economic activity was at its minimum. There was a widespread fall in prices, income and employment, which the classical economist could not explain. It was at this time the Keynes came out with an alternative theory. Keynes' theory is named after Keynes' book entitled The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, published in 1936. The book brought about the revolution in economic thought. Let's see the theory. An economy can be in equilibrium at less than full employment level. Okay, less than full employment level. It is a normal situation. It is called a underemployment equilibrium situation. Here, Keynesian theory says that demand creates its own supply. The classical theory, they are saying that Supply creates its own demand. Here, demand creates its own demand. Then, next one, the aggregate demand for goods and services determines the level of output, income, and employment. This is because the level of aggregate supply is constant and given in the short run. Okay, according to Keynes, the aggregate demand for goods and services, determines the level of output, income, and employment. So aggregate demand is the main factor that determining the output, income, and employment. This is because the aggregate supply is constant and given in the short run. Okay. The next is, according to Keynes, the government intervention through the monetary and fiscal measures can help in bringing about the equilibrium between aggregate demand and aggregate supply. This is the Keynesian theory of output and employment. Let's see the assumption of this theory. The first assumption, rigid wages and prices. The classical economists believed that the flexible wage and prices, here rigid, there is no change in price and wages. It means that wages and prices do not change freely. Government intervenes through the minimum wage laws to fix wages when supply of labor is more. It results in involuntary unemployment. It is defined as a situation where those who seek employment at the current wage rate cannot find work. In other words, rigid wages leads to unemployment. Rigid wages leads to unemployment. Where there is a flexible wage leads to full employment. Here, the rigid wages leads to unemployment. Government intervenes to fix of essential commodities prices through the various policies. So the prices and wages are rigid in Keynesian theory. The second assumption, constant marginal product of labor. The marginal product of labor is nothing but addition made to total product when one more unit of labor is employed. This is called marginal product of labor. It is measured to be constant, implying addition made to output is same by every increment of labor employed. Okay, coupled with fixed wages. It means that each additional unit of output cost the same for the producer. I repeat, it means that each additional unit of output cost the same for producers. Okay, this can be explained with the help of diagram. Keynes gave perfectly elastic supply curve. This is a perfectly elastic supply curve. Okay, AS curve. Okay, it shows that a particular price level, firms are willing to produce any amount of output. It is based on assumption of rigid wages and prices and a constant marginal product of labor. Once the full employment level of output has been reached at OX level, further rise in aggregate supply is not possible. At this point, AS become perfectly inelastic. Look here, in this diagram shows the underemployment equilibrium. The Keynes theory shows equilibrium level of output at underemployment level. Look here, this is the equilibrium point. It is point of equilibrium where aggregate demand, okay, equals to aggregate supply curve. Okay, at here. It shows underemployment since equilibrium level of output is OX1. Equilibrium level of output is OX1, which is less than the full employment level of output OX. This is the full employment level of output. Okay, X1 is the less than the full employment level of output. OP is the equilibrium price. See, OP is the equilibrium price. Keynesian theory recommended the significant role of aggregate demand, which can help an economy in moving from underemployment level to full employment equilibrium level. Let's see the comparison between the classical and the Keynesian theory. The classical theory. The classical economists held that there is always full employment in the economy. The Keynesian theory. It was believed that full employment is an ideal and unrealistic situation and underemployment is a normal situation. This is the Keynesian view. The classical view. The classical economists believed that supply creates its own demand. Keynes believed that demand creates its own own supply. Keynes believed that demand creates its own supply. The classical theory. It is based on the assumption of flexible wage and prices. The Keynesian theory is based on assumption of rigid or fixed wages and prices. The classical theory. It gives perfectly inelastic aggregate supply curve. The Keynesian theory gives perfectly elastic aggregate supply curve, which after full employment level, it becomes perfectly inelastic. Before that, it is a perfectly elastic supply curve. Under the classical theory, if unemployment occurs, it is voluntary unemployment. Under classical theory, if unemployment occurs, that is called a voluntary unemployment. The Keynesian theory leads to involuntary unemployment. These are the comparison of classical and Keynesian theory. Okay, in this class, we've seen the classical theory and Keynesian theory. Thank you.